Bada bing, bada boom.
Dr. Tahir is a therapist that normally doesn't do house calls. But when you get a call from a wealthy business tycoon that holds a ton of influence and power in the area, you're gonna go. He didn't even just go alone, okay? Dr. Tahir brought 5 of his other employees from his clinic. The call was for the rich business tycoon's son, who was holed up in the mansion and going through something. It was very vague. The business tycoon was on vacation. He didn't give the therapist much to go off of. So when the team, the squad really, of therapists, they get to the home, they find out that the son is unwilling to let them in. So they wait outside for like 30 minutes before the dad calls back and is like, you know what? I've got a ladder in the shed. Just break into the house. I'm not sure what they were expecting. Maybe they were expecting the patient to be on the ground, refusing to leave the house. Maybe they're having a panic attack. I really don't know. Maybe they're having a psychotic episode. That's not what they got. When all 6 of them entered the home, the son ran up to them, knife in hand, and jammed it up the chin of one of the employees. The knife went through the therapist's chin, jaw, mouth, and pierced his tongue, so upwards. He pulled the knife out, blood squirted everywhere, and the other therapists, they're like, okay, now we're gonna fight for our lives to make sure that this patient is subdued. They're grabbing blankets, tying him up. It's taking forever to just get this man under control. He's got a gun, he's got a knife, he's got all these other weapons. Finally, when they get him on the ground tied up, that's when they saw the body of a young woman, a diplomat's daughter, tortured and murdered. Her body was laying in a pool of blood, and her head was found detached 3 feet away from her body. The patient would later state, what? She wanted to be sacrificed. As always, full show notes are available at rottenmangopodcast.com. This case does take place in Pakistan, and we had multiple Urdu-speaking researchers help assist in gathering of the facts. There's a few points in the story where it's more speculative than factual because there were no eyewitnesses present during these key moments. So I'm going to try and present all the possible scenarios, and you can make up your mind on which you believe occurred. The Jaffer family in Pakistan could be on their own episode of Succession, really. Mr. Jaffer was an influential, wealthy business tycoon. His company specialized in massive construction projects, and it said that he had big military contracts, which anyone who's doing contracts with the military, automatically I'm like, these people are richer than beyond belief. He lived in this modern, guard-gated house with his wife and his 2 sons. They even had a whole staff to manage the home. Housekeepers, gardeners, kitchen staff, security staff. I really have no idea how deep their money runs. I can't find a net worth anywhere. But they do kind of give off that new money vibes. And I don't mean that in like a harsh, weird, derogatory way, but in the sense that, you know, they love to throw a good high society party. So during the weekdays, the family would focus on business. Everyone kind of did their own thing. Mr. Jaffer was always on business trips, doing big deals. Meanwhile, his 2 sons, they're living complete opposite lives. Okay, so on the weekends, they would throw these lavish dinner parties. Staff would be carrying in these giant vases of fresh flowers. The kitchen would be busy with teams of chefs crafting out the most elaborate seasonal recipes. And one by one, these rich families would just trail into the mansion. Some of them are old money families. Some of them are new money, respectable, influential families. And oftentimes they would bring their kids with them to introduce, to mingle amongst each other while the parents, I don't know, talk business. So these kids, they are true socialites. Most of them had gone abroad for schooling, whether it be in the US or Europe. They were all well-traveled, well-spoken, and very well-funded. And I'm sure, naturally, it becomes this unspoken competition amongst the parents. Whose kid just got accepted into that prestigious university abroad? Oh, whose kid just snowboarded with a celebrity in Switzerland? Whose kid is the most well-read? The Jaffers had 2 sons, but you would really only hear them talking about one. Zahir, crown jewel of the family. Even though he was the firstborn into the family of business tycoons, he wanted to study psychology. That's what intrigued him. He wanted to help people. So he gets his certification to be a counselor at a high-profile mental health organization called Therapy Works. He gave lectures and conducted counseling sessions for students in Pakistan. He held these mental health awareness sessions in well-known schools. I believe he even tried his hand on one-on-one counseling. But he still made time to work with his family. Whenever they needed him, he was the chief brand strategist at his dad's company at one point. He was born in the US, grew up in Pakistan. Before he started studying abroad, he was fluent in English and in Urdu, and he was the golden son, the golden child. So whenever the Jaffers boasted about their child's accomplishments, it was this son. The other one was kind of like the black sheep of the family. They tucked him away, closed the door, and he was the family secret. They never talked about him in public. It's like he didn't even exist. They honestly couldn't even comprehend how he was part of their picture-perfect family. He was admitted into a psych ward in his late teens, early 20s, diagnosed with schizophrenia, which, yes, is a very serious, life-altering diagnosis, but it's something that can be treated. I mean, we've seen so many people time and time again get treated for something like this and live very healthy, productive lives. But when he was sent to therapy, nothing was working. And it wasn't even his mental health that was the problem. It was because he was addicted to meth. So of course, nothing the therapist could do could really make a dent on his progress if he was addicted to meth. It was reported that he would allegedly have induced psychosis while studying abroad. At one point, he was even deported out of the United Kingdom for assaulting his own mother and potentially being involved in sexual harassment and essay cases in the UK.
Wow.
So yeah, the Jaffers never really talked about him. They only talked about perfect Zahir, who's now in his mid to late 20s. So he's like 27-ish, and he should start thinking about settling down. That's what they're thinking. You know, the parents started using these high society gatherings almost as a way to see if there was anyone that they could pair with their heir. Noor was one of the most respected, quote, kids at these dinner parties. She is the daughter of a former Pakistan diplomat. Her father was not just a very well-known, but also a very well-respected person in the political realm, which is, you know, pretty difficult to accomplish. And like all the socialite kids that would be invited to these parties, Noor was also very well-traveled. She lived most of her childhood in Ireland. She had an Irish accent. She went to school all over the world, even in South Korea. She was actually admitted into Heir University, which is one of the most prestigious colleges in South Korea. She studied in the US, just to name a few. She attended she loved studying. It's kind of weird, but it's not that she loved the act of studying. It's not even like that she loved grades. She was very interesting in the sense that she liked to acquire knowledge. She was genuinely passionate about learning new things. On top of that, she's a human rights activist, always attending local marches, rallies, very vocal for the causes that she believed in. So if we're talking about on-paper stats, Noor is as perfect as it gets. Educated, religious, activist, conventionally beautiful, kind-hearted, family-oriented, studious, the daughter of a diplomat, you know? And she could even bake on top of that. So it would make sense that Zahir would feel like, oh, you know what? I think Noor would be a great match for me. Zahir's parents seem to agree. This would be the perfect wife for their heir. They meet at one of these dinner parties, and it's pretty unclear when exactly they started dating or even getting to know each other, but sources state that Zahir struck up a friendship with Noor first. They become friendly, and they officially become a couple in 2018. They had that typical YA novel love story. Yeah, Zahir was like this rich, shy, kind of reserved person, but people said that Noor would bring out his spontaneous and fun side. And they're like, wow, Zahir actually cracks jokes. This is my first time hearing it. It's so interesting. Noor was also someone that didn't really care for money. I mean, she understood the value of hard work behind money. She wasn't one of those people that is like, oh, money doesn't buy happiness. No, she understood, but she just wasn't the type to spend a ton of money on material goods. And everyone could see why Zahir was obsessed with Noor. She was a little different. I don't want to say different because it makes it sound like she's a pick-me, and she's not a pick-me. She's actually a girl's girl. She had a girl gang. That's what they called it. I mean, her best friends, all of her friends were girls, and she would do anything for them. But she was just very interesting. The way that everyone describes her is very passionate about everything. Like, it's hard to keep up with her. You know, there's a few topics that I know a lot about, or I think I like to talk about, right? Noor loved talking about everything. I mean, she would come up to you bubbling with excitement to talk about the history of different countries' flags and the meaning behind each color of countries that aren't even on the same continent, and then turn around and just excitedly talk to you about how she discovered the perfect oven temperature for soft yet crunchy macaroons. And you're like, okay, this is a very multifaceted person. She had a lot of niche interests, which I think is incredibly charismatic. And Noor would do this thing, and it was kind of a running joke between everyone. She would go to the store every single week and buy these Nando's Peri Bites. They're like snacks. I imagine they're like chips. They've got a little kick to them, little, like, tiny bit spicy. She would get so excited, sit down, pop open the bag, take a bite, and excitedly say, oh my gosh, too spicy. But then her hand would be right back in the bag grabbing another one. And this would happen every single week, every time she went to the store, and all of her friends were like, just stop eating the snack. But she loved it. And everyone loved watching her eat the snack because it's the same reaction every single time. And so yeah, Zahir is completely, utterly infatuated with her during the initial stages of their relationship. I'm pretty sure it was mutual. Noor fell pretty hard for Zahir as well. And it's speculated that the Jaffers were really happy about the two dating. Noor was really a good catch for Zahir. They just hoped that she would never meet their other son. Zahir did a pretty good job keeping that side of him away from dinner parties. But how long could he really hide it? Zahir Jaffer was the only son and heir to the Jaffer family fortune. He doesn't have a brother. He is a complicated person. Zahir was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and while being treated, he earned his counseling certifications. He went from being a patient to a therapist at Therapy Works.
I see.
Yes.
So he did all of that.
All of that. He
But
was
on the outside, he's like a perfect son.
the good son, the golden child. Everyone's like, wow, how did we get a son like Zahir?
Wow.
On the outside, he's reserved, polite, treated those around him with the utmost respect, but he also occasionally assaulted his mom. He only ever spoke highly of women in public, but he also messaged female acquaintances things like, I will titty you till I slice off your breasts and nipples. He would call female acquaintances faces and bimbotic hoes.
To who?
Like his childhood acquaintances, girls that he grew up with. And
Just
they would lose
for no
touch.
reason?
Yes, they would lose touch. And then, you know, they might be Facebook messaging and he's like, oh, when are you coming to town? And then he would just bombard them with these crazy messages. And obviously these women did not respond kindly to his messages because why would they? He would throw slurs at them. He would ask them if they liked performing services on male private parts. It was just really bad. But Noor didn't see any of this. She did not see this side of Zahir until it was too late. There's actually a video of them that has since gone viral. They're dancing together at a friend's wedding, and they honestly look like the perfect type of couple, like the type of couple that people would be jealous about. The wedding itself is lavish, it's grand, and you can tell that these kids that are having fun are part of influential, wealthy, affluent families. It feels perfect. It feels like one of those romance novels. They look like they're in love. Soon after, Zahir would behead Noor. Zahir had a one-way ticket to New York City at 3:50 a.m. So he was going to leave. He's like, bye Pakistan, I'm going back to the US. So while the rest of the city slept, he would be getting on a plane, getting ready to start this new chapter of his life. But he's thinking, is that really what I want? It's kind of bittersweet. I'm sure a part of him was excited, and then another part of him is like, what about this life I'm leaving behind? So he picked up his phone and he called the person that he wanted to see most before leaving. July 18th of 2021, Noor was very busy. She's prepping for Eid al-Fitr, which is a Muslim holiday, and she was spending time with her mom, helping her prep food in the kitchen, and she gets this phone call. She excuses herself. It was Zahir. They hadn't spoken in 6 months since their breakup. They've been pretty no contact. So after 3 years of dating, they broke up and she's randomly getting a call at like 9 p.m. It was pretty rough for Noor, the breakup, but she knew she was making the right choice. Her friends kept reassuring her, we always thought that he was a little too controlling. At first, he was so sweet, but I don't know, he just gives me bad vibes. To give you some context, both Noor and Zahir are Muslim, but Noor was a lot more devoted to her faith than Zahir, and it became a problem when Zahir would... Okay, so it was speculated that Zahir was the one that encouraged her and if not demanded that she stop wearing her burqa. Eventually, Noor would break up with him, and now 6 months later, he's calling out of the blue and she doesn't know what for. She picks up the phone and he tells her that he's leaving for the US tonight. In about 7 hours to be exact, he would be on a flight to New York City. It's a one-way ticket. He doesn't know when he's going to be back. So this is at around 9 p.m. Technically, his flight is the next day at around 3:30 in the morning. And he asks her, is there any way at all that we can just say goodbye one last time? For closure, we did date for 3 years. I just want to see your face one last time, one final goodbye. Noor agreed to meet up with him, but to avoid ruining such special holidays with her parents, she just told them, I'm gonna briefly go visit a friend, okay, and I'll be right back. She knew that if she told them that she was going to go say goodbye to Zahir, it would be this whole conversation. Her parents would say, absolutely not. So she's like, okay, let me just go. She goes to meet up with him at a local plaza. She leaves the house at around 9:05 p.m., gets to the plaza 40-ish minutes later, and she texts him, where are you? I'm not sure what excuse he made, but he requests that she come to his house instead to say goodbye. Maybe he was like, I'm not done packing yet. I'm so busy, right? My flight's in a few hours. Noor hesitated, but she's very familiar with Zahir's home. She knew that it was never empty either. But also, when you're meeting your ex-boyfriend that you dated for 3 years, that's not really a concern of yours. But let's say it was, his home is never empty. Even when there is no dinner party, even when there's no crazy socialite gathering, there's almost always 2 to 3 home staff on site. A guard, a chef, some housekeeper of sorts. So by 10 p.m., she pulls up to the tall gates that are around his modern mansion, and the house is lit up, so nothing about it is alarming. The house has CCTV cameras on the outside too. She was let in by the guard on site, and Noor's arrival would trigger a series of very peculiar events. Because we don't know exactly what went down at the exact time once she entered that home, but we have a little bit of tidbits of information. A little after 10 p.m., so almost right after Noor arrived, Zahir makes multiple calls to his travel agent asking to cancel the flight that's coming up in 5 hours.
So as soon as she arrived?
Yeah. And the travel agent is telling Zahir, I don't really think that's going to be possible. You're flying out in a few hours. There's no way that I can cancel your flight and refund you your money because it doesn't really work like that. Zahir then requested to change his flight. Instead of leaving in a few hours, he wanted to depart to America in 10 days. But again, that was just too tricky because you can't just change your flight ticket without paying some sort of penalty or fine from the airline just hours before your flight. So when Zahir's agent is expressing all of these different issues with him, he tells her, okay, fine, I'll just keep my flight the same. At 11 p.m., a scheduled taxi arrives at Zahir's house to take him to the airport. He booked this ride when he initially booked his ticket, so this has been scheduled for a while. Clearly, he's having second thoughts about going to New York. He calls the taxi driver that's sitting outside of the gates of his house, and Zahir tells him, sorry, I'm still packing. Do you mind waiting a little bit? The driver waited 36 minutes. Zahir called him once more. Okay, just wait a little bit longer. Hold on. On the third call with the taxi driver, Zahir tells him, you know what, I canceled my plans to go to the airport, but I'll still pay you. So one of the guards will bring out money since I made you wait. But anyway, bye. The pay was very generous. I think the cab driver made double what he would have made on a standard drive back and forth from the airport. So as a token of appreciation, the driver calls Zahir and says, hey, if you change your mind about going to the airport tonight or even tomorrow, you already paid me, so I can give you a lift anytime. 2 hours later, at around 2 a.m., Zahir calls that cab driver and says, you know what? Maybe you can take me to the airport. I have no idea the distance between his home and the airport, but this seems pretty tight for an international flight. Because I would imagine that now it's what? 1, 2 in the morning. His flight is at 3:30.
Yeah, that's Yeah, that's too tight.
Yeah, because even if it's like a 30-minute drive, it's pretty tight. So this is when the cab driver starts feeling like, ooh, something's not right here. Zahir comes out of the house with his luggage and with a woman. The driver helps Zahir put the luggage in the trunk, and he notices a few things. One, the woman is barefoot. They're going to an airport. I don't even think you can be let on a plane without shoes. Second, once they get in the car, the driver notices that Zahir is talkative and seems normal, but this woman is just silent. She doesn't seem like she's peacefully just enjoying the drive. She seems out of it, and she's silent. She doesn't say a single word, doesn't even respond when Zahir speaks to her. Third, in the middle of the drive, Zahir abruptly requests that they turn around and head back to his house instead of the airport. It was sudden. There was no prior conversation about this. There was no, oh man, I don't think we're going to make it in time. It's just, turn around. Too late.
What?
Trevor's like, okay, this is so weird, but he's still getting paid for it, so I guess. He U-turns it around, parks the car in front of Zahir's home, and watches him take his luggage in one hand and a firm grip on the woman with his other hand. It's weird. But his years of being a cab driver, I mean, they taught him a few things. One of them being, everything is weird at 3 a.m. He takes one last look at the house, gets back in his car, and starts making his way to his next drive. It's stated that Zahir proposed to Noor that night instead of flying out to New York City. She rejected him. So now she had to die. For the next 48 hours behind the tall gates and cold concrete walls, Zahir would hold his ex-girlfriend, the daughter of a diplomat, captive and torture her to death. We don't have an exact timeline of the torture, but we do know what injuries she sustained. Sometime after being dropped off by the taxi, Zahir tries to keep getting Noor to accept his proposal, is the speculation. She keeps refusing, so the torture begins. It's said that he punched her repeatedly with brass knuckles.
Oh, like those fighter...
Yes, that you put on your...
gosh.
Yes. He beat her with the back of a pistol, mentally tortured her by threatening to shoot her. There were shallow cuts on the back of her knees, and it's speculated that she tried to run off, and he would cut the back of her knees to make it difficult for her to walk or run. There were bruises all over her body, but particularly her inner thighs. Noor had been essayed by Zahir. There was also bruising on her head, as if she had been hit multiple times with a very sharp object. This lasted for 2 days. And on that very last day of torture, Zahir takes out his Swiss Army knife, which Swiss Army knives are not that long. The longest ones that I could find online were about 5 inches, not even, so think shorter than the length of most phones. He used that knife to try and attack Noor. She pushed back, dug her nails into him, and that pissed him off. He starts stabbing her, but they were all very shallow cuts because the knife was on the shorter side. And I don't want that to make it sound like I'm downplaying her injuries. They were very, very painful cuts. She's losing a lot of blood. There was blood all over the room, the walls, the floor, but none of the stab wounds themselves were fatal. Noor was stabbed over a dozen times. Noor ended up fainting, and at this point, Zahir starts to choke her. He kept choking her until she was no longer moving, and then he took his knife, and I saw no other reports that stated that any other knife was used during the crimes, so we can assume that it's the 5-inch Swiss Army knife. He took that after Noor had passed and started to detach her head. I imagine that it must have taken a while. We do know at least that Noor has passed, so she wasn't feeling at least the physical pain of this. And when he was done, he kicked her head a few times. Her head was found 3 feet away from her body. And this detail really, I don't even know how to digest this information. It's a mixture of this violent child that's throwing some sort of sick tantrum mixed with the literal devil that won't even spare someone in their death. That has just such little remorse and respect for not even an individual in particular, but just the sanctity of life in general. Zahir Jaffer had just killed his ex-girlfriend for rejecting him, and he was plotting to get away with it. July 20th, 2022. This is the day of Noor's murder. So we can presume that she's already dead when he makes these new series of phone calls. A family friend of Zahir's gets a phone call around dinner time. This is a middle-aged man. He picks it up and he doesn't even have Zahir's number, so he has no idea why Zahir is calling him. To give you some context, this family friend wants to remain anonymous, but he's friends with Zahir's dad. But apparently he's not even that close to Zahir's dad. He's not even that close of a family friend. He didn't grow up with Zahir. He doesn't know Zahir like that. I mean, they're on cordial, polite terms, but they're definitely more like acquaintances. So it's just kind of odd that Zahir was calling him out of the blue. Hey, Zahir, what's going on? Do you need something? And Zahir's just telling him, yeah, something terrible happened. Come to my house immediately. You have to tell me what happened. Like, are you all right? What's going on? Robbers raided the house. I'm all alone. My parents aren't home. Please come quickly. Yeah, okay, let me see what I can do. The family friend throws his jacket over his shoulder, pats his pocket to make sure he has his keys, and just as he's about to walk out that door, he's literally about to pull on the door handle, he stops dead in his tracks. Something's not right. Zahir has never called him before. Zahir shouldn't even really have his number. He doesn't even know how he got his number. They almost never interacted. And if he was being robbed, why wouldn't he call the cops, call his parents, call anybody but him? I mean, he's not even like part of the military or the police or anything. Like, he's a random businessman.
Yeah.
He's not even that close to the family. So he's like, okay, even if I go to Zahir's house, then what? Like, what could I possibly do for Zahir?
Yeah, so what? He said there's a robber in the house?
There was a robbery. And he's very vague about it.
Okay.
And he pulls out his phone and he calls Zahir's dad. And he lets him know, hey, I just got a call from your son. I don't know, apparently your house has been robbed and he's alone. I don't know what's going on, but I think that you should try and figure it out. This is when everything just kind of descends into full-blown chaos. It's a giant game of telephone where only a few people know how sick and twisted the truth is. Zahir's dad got right to work after this phone call, but he doesn't handle it in the way that you would imagine. So from call logs, we know that Zahir and Zahir's dad were in constant communication the day of the murder. So if there truly was a robbery, which there wasn't, Zahir's dad probably would have been the first to know about it. But let's say he didn't. He's out of town. He's a smart businessman. He's a wealthy tycoon. What do you think the best thing to do is? Call the police. Have them sent over to the house where his son would be found traumatized after an alleged home invasion. That was not the choice that Zahir's dad made. Zahir's dad starts calling up random family friends telling them, there was a robbery at our house. They took paintings and my precious ornaments. They beat my son.
What?
And all the family friends are like, why are you calling me right now with this? I mean, like, I feel bad, but like, what could I do?
Yeah.
In another call, he told a family friend, my son was robbed. He was at the house when the robbers invaded. My son killed a robber. How can I get rid of the body? Which to me is very telling. Zahir's dad knows that there's a dead body in that house. Zahir's dad told multiple family friends that there was a robbery at his house and Zahir was a victim. And then he turns around and calls Therapy Works, the counseling center that Zahir used to be a patient and later started working for. Zahir's dad calls the CEO, the main therapist, with a very strange request. He asks Dr. Tahir, a psychologist, quickly, please go to my house. My son is trying to solicit a girl. I know, you just cocked your head, okay? Obviously, Dr. Tahir is having the same reaction as us. He asks the dad on the phone, I'm sorry, what do you mean solicit a girl? Like, is he with a sex worker? Because is he soliciting sex work? Like, what? That phrase is so weird. And like, I don't know if you would call a therapist if that was the real situation of what was going on.
Yeah.
And he said, Zahir's dad responded so calmly, almost with like a chuckle in his voice. Tahir, well, you know what I mean. You're a smart man. Something like that. Something like that. Something like that. What does that even mean? Something like that. Dr. Tahir claims he had no idea what was going on. This is the only information he claims he was given. He gathers a team of 6 workers from the clinic and, okay, the presumption here is that Zahir's parents invested in or heavily funded the clinic. So he was just kind of in the pocket of Zahir's dad, so he had to go. Otherwise, I think he would have just been like, you're very strange, sir. Maybe you should come in for a session.
Yeah, but why is he gathering 6 people? Like, what is he trying to do?
We don't know. So that's why people think they must have known about it. Some people say, no, maybe he just wants backup for whatever reason because he knows that Zahir was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Some people say, no, he knew from that phone call what was already going on. And he gathered a team to help him clean the mess. But we don't know, okay? We don't know. So they gather up a team of 6 workers from the clinic and they start heading over to the Jaffer mansion. They get there. I don't know what they're expecting, but they seem to be a little confused because there's already another group gathered outside the house.
What?
The group also seems very confused. They're like, we don't know what on earth is going on. We're Zahir's friends. Zahir's been calling us all day saying that it was a robbery, he was in a life or death situation, and that we needed to bring our own personal guards. So these are all rich kids. They all have like family guards.
Okay.
So many people are outside of Zahir's home and half of them are under the impression that there's a scary robbery that just happened. The other half, the clinic's team, they're under the impression that Zahir is in there with a woman and something is happening. Someone's being solicited. Yet nobody calls the police. The therapist, all 6 of them, just stood there outside for half an hour. Finally, they decide to take a ladder and try to break into the house. But at that point, it would be too late. Noor would already be dead. See, the interesting thing though about families like this, like I said, everybody already has a guard, right? Is they all have house staff. So where are Zahir's house staff? Why couldn't they just come out and explain what's really going on to the confused crowd? Or why couldn't they just, I don't know, let the therapy workers into the house instead of having them climb up a ladder and break into the home? There were 3 house staff present during the past 2 days. A gardener, a cook, and a security guard. For 2 days, they heard Noor's screams and they didn't do anything. And I get that this is their employer and I get that they must have been terrified of what could happen if you go up against a family like this. But this is 2 days. It's not even a split-second choice that you make, but for every second of those 48 hours, they made the choice to not save Noor. Noor tried to escape 6 times. During the torturous 48-hour ordeal, 6 times. Had a single one of the staff just stood their ground or helped her or looked the other way, they could have saved her life. But instead, the staff prevented her from leaving. The house was like a total lockdown torture chamber.
So they're part of the murder.
Yeah. In one instance, it's dark outside, around 2:41 a.m. Noor was seen on the home security cameras running barefoot towards the main house gate. She had made it out of the house alive, but the security guard locked the gate to prevent her from escaping.
Wow.
Zahir came out of the house at that point. You could see Noor pleading with her hands together in almost a praying motion, begging to be let go. Zahir refused and dragged her back into the house. In another instance, July 20th, so the day of the murder, it's actually believed that this was the incident right before the murder. At 7:12 p.m., Noor was desperate. She jumped from the balcony with her phone that she managed to pry away from Zahir. She landed in a way that impacted her stomach, so she was injured. I mean, think about this is after 40 something hours of torture and she just landed on her stomach. It was a big impact fall. She's holding her stomach, running towards the main gate. But again, the guard and the gardener were seen on the home security footage closing the gate on her to stop her.
God.
Zahir is then seen running out of the house, grabbing her and dragging her back in. At one point, she kind of trips on the door frame and he's physically dragging her in. The security guard did call Zahir's father after one of these attempts and told him, "Sir, your son is taking part in, quote, rude behavior." According to our researchers, apparently in Urdu, it's an even more of an understatement. It's being like, oh, your son is partaking in shenanigans. I would not classify dragging someone by their hair back into a house and holding them captive and then hearing blood-curdling screams from the victim rude behavior. Zahir's dad just responded casually to the guard, "We'll just figure something out." So they did nothing. And now, even while a group was forming outside the house, they did nothing. Even when 6 people from the clinic came in, past the gate, grabbed a ladder, broke into the house, they did nothing. Not a single one of them stepped aside to call the police. Not a staff member of the house, not any of the 6 therapy employees. Nobody called the police.
So they're breaking into the house, but they don't know what happened yet, right? At this point?
Yeah, but I would imagine if you're breaking into a house, you think that something is clearly wrong with someone. I mean, I guess they could argue that they didn't call the police because it would be a bad look on the Jaffers, and the Jaffers have maybe, allegedly, some financial ties to the clinic. I don't know. But they take a ladder, put it up against the side of the house, unlock the window, break into the house, and they see the crime scene. And again, at this point, any one of the 6, because that's a lot of people, 6 people, one of them could have stepped aside, one of them could have gone back down the ladder to call the police, but they didn't. According to therapist Dr. Tahir, he said the room was covered in blood. They didn't even have time to process what they were looking at before Zahir came at them with a gun and a knife. Yeah, he tried to shoot at them, but thankfully the bullet got jammed. Zahir grabbed his knife, stabbed one of the employees, and I mean, it was really bad. It's like one of those undercut, but like went through the mouth. Everyone froze, and then all hell broke loose. Zahir tries escaping through the window. 2 of the employees are running towards the employee that's now on the ground bleeding. The other 3 are running towards Zahir to try and hold him back, trying to overpower him. They try to grab whatever sheets and fabric they could find to tie him down, but Zahir is not a small man. They stated it took a lot to disarm him and tie him up so that they could finally call the police. And once the chaos was settled, that's when they stated they saw Noor's body and her head 3 feet away. Now, with the sounds of 7 grown adults screaming and fighting, one of the neighbors decided to alert the police. But he doesn't call the police. He decides to go to the police station and personally tell them, hey, you should come to my neighbor's house. So again, very odd. When the police make it to the scene, Zahir is tied up already. He's laying face down on the floor, and the therapy works employees are surrounding him. Zahir was quickly arrested, and he was covered in blood. Noor's family had no idea what had been happening for the past 2 days. Noor left on the night of the 18th, stating that she was going to go meet with a friend and be right back. And something to note is Noor was 27, Zahir was 30 at the time this took place. So while she never really went out late at night with no intention of coming home, that's just not who Noor was. Not that anything's wrong with that. It didn't really seem like the end of the world, even though it's out of character. You know, she's 27, she's responsible. I think she had already built so much trust with her family. They're not going to sit there and be like, oh, Noor's gone off to do something crazy. It's probably like, oh man, Noor's friend probably needs her help on something. But they really started getting worried the night of the 18th, so the night that she left, when she wasn't coming home like past midnight. This is really, really unlike her, right? And if she did have some sort of emergency, she's the type of person that would have told her parents. Like, hey, my friend needs me, something happened or something. She would have told her parents. They start calling her, it goes to voicemail. The family keeps texting her, asking her, hey, just let us know you're safe. Just let us know where you are. What's going on? Authorities believe that Zahir had taken Noor's phone, refused to let her talk to her parents. But as her parents became more and more frantic that night, and the calls and texts became more frequent, Zahir stepped in and forced Noor to text her mom that she was out with her friends and they were going to do an impromptu trip to a neighboring city. Again, Noor's parents were so confused and honestly kind of disappointed, because Noor was the type of daughter that almost always, except for this time, right, this time quote, that cared about spending all the important holidays with her family, and it was about to be Eid al-Fitr. So this is really, 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 really out of character. But I think that they tried to reason with themselves, because they had so much trust in their daughter. She wouldn't have done this unless she absolutely needed to. Maybe her friend is really going through something. Maybe her friend needs her help in a neighboring city. Like, she's just not the type of kid to be like, I'm having so much fun, like, I'm gonna stay out. So they're like, okay, let's just have some trust in our daughter because she's earned it. She'll probably come home and everything can be explained because that's who Noor is. The parents went about their plans, even though they were sad that Noor wouldn't be there. Noor's dad went out to go buy a goat and some fruit. The goat detail will be explained later, but it's part of the whole celebrations of the holiday. Now, Noor's mom was running the rest of their errands. Eventually, they make it back home on July 20th. They looked around and Noor is still not home. Noor's mom starts reading the Quran and praying, and she hears her husband screaming in the next room. She runs over and she's like, what's going on? What's happened? And of course, her anxiety is peaking because this is a diplomat. This is a man who stays cool under pressure. This is not someone who outwardly shows any sort of panic or dramatic emotions. His literal career has been built on not doing that. And it was like he was in a trance. He's crying, he's sobbing, he's screaming, my child, my child. And so her heart is racing. She's like, tell me what's going on. But he was not in a state that he could even register his wife. So her anxiety is going through the roof. She's running around. She finally finds her son who's in the house. And she's like, what's going on? Her son tells her that Noor is gone. At first, Noor's mom thought it was an accident. But it was just so much worse. I mean, obviously, grief is hitting the family hard. Noor had an older brother and an older sister. And Noor's older sister, Sarah, was practically her twin. I think they were like 5 years apart, which is a lot, but people said you would never even notice. They acted like twins. Everyone said it's like they had one soul in two bodies. And now one of those bodies had been tortured, beheaded, and murdered. And it was like a piece of Sarah's soul had just died. She was such a wreck. Even their father, who everyone leaned on during these tough times, Noor's dad was known for having a really big laugh. It was what everywhere that he was a diplomat, in whatever country he was in, that's what everyone remembered him for. And it was the kind of laugh that's like that dad laugh. It's very comforting and it's loud. And people they would laugh with him and they would say, shh, stop laughing. It's so loud. People are going to be like disrupted. And they said ever since that day, that laugh was gone. And of course, they all, most of all, miss Noor's laugh. Noor's cousin said, Noor's laugh was something special. She laughed a lot at things that weren't even that funny. But the minute that she starts laughing, you'd be laughing at her because her laugh was just so fun. Her laugh was like contagious. And now she was gone. Do you know the story of Abraham?
No.
Okay. I think this story is prevalent across multiple different religions, so please correct me if I'm wrong. I think different names are used. I think in Christianity, it's Isaac is the name, but let me tell you the story. Abraham saw in a dream that Abraham is a disciple of God, and he sees in a dream that he's beheading his own son, Isaac. This is the Christian version. I think in the Islamic text, it's Ishmael, I believe. So Abraham believes that God is telling him to sacrifice his own son. Now, obviously, Abraham and his wife were torn apart by this because on one hand, God is telling them to do something and they need to trust God because God would never do anything without reason. But on the other hand, this is their son. This is their own flesh and blood. How do you kill your own offspring? Abraham and his wife decided, we have to do this. This is the ultimate sacrifice. Abraham also told Isaac, and Isaac was like, yes, we must do this for God. So they trek up a giant mountain. They find this rock. Isaac was going to lay his neck down on that rock, and he was crying, knowing what was about to happen to him, but he told his dad, like, Dad, do it. They're both emotional. Abraham swings up his axe to kill his own son, and an angel appears to tell him, do not lay a hand on that boy. It was a test. And God was pleased that Abraham was willing to give up all he had for him. So that day, Abraham rejoiced, and he gets to have a son, and they sacrifice a goat instead. I know that this is not the best retelling of this story, and I know it's a pretty prominent story across multiple different religions, but ultimately, it's a story of sacrifice. And if I'm not mistaken, every year Muslims celebrate this sacrifice, this story, by sacrificing a goat. It is their way of showing Allah, like, we are willing to make the greatest sacrifice if you need us to. Mm. And the meat of the goat is then given to charity. So why is this story important? Well, Zahir tells this to authorities. He tells the story of Abraham, which they already know because it's a predominantly Muslim country. And he states that Noor wanted to be sacrificed.
Wow. Holy.
And the day that they sacrificed the goat is Eid al-Fitr, which is the day that she was murdered.
Huh.
He claims she came to him and wanted him to sacrifice her like a goat. Why? Because she had been in a relationship with Zahir and that would go against her beliefs, and she now wanted to atone for her sins by being sacrificed. This doesn't make any sense for any reason, okay? For so many reasons. The most blatant one being that would mean Noor was essentially taking her own life, which is not allowed in most religions, including Islam. So this whole story contradicts itself. Secondly, any murder of any kind, even quote sacrifices, is not acceptable in Islam. They're a very non-violent religion. So the Islam belief is killing one man is like killing all of mankind, which is why the law of retaliation is given so much precedence. So I know that in stories that we've talked, and I wonder if it's also some propaganda in the West, you know what I mean? But there is this weird out of nowhere belief that Islam can be a violent religion, and I think it's very, very just a misunderstood religion, especially here in the West, especially in the US. I'm learning every day new things about Islam, and you know, my Muslim friends are always telling me new things, and I'm like, oh, that's so interesting, because when I read the news, it's always depicted a different way, right? So there's always that thing that's brought up, which is eye for an eye, right? In a lot of predominantly Muslim countries, the death penalty is a little bit more enforced or well received by the general public. So in the West, there's this connotation of like, wow, it's just so violent over there. But that's not why. It's because the Islam belief against killing a man is so strong, is so like, that is the ultimate worst thing that you could do. So now they give the power to the family of the victims. You can take an eye for an eye, because that's how much they don't like killing. It's not because they're like, oh, you did something wrong, death penalty. It's not it. But it's just infuriating to hear him say this, that he was willing to sacrifice his ex for a relationship, quote, sin, that he also took just as much part in. And also, it's just so stupid because there's literal CCTV footage of Noor trying to escape, but here he is saying with his full chest that Noor wanted this to happen to her. Under Noor's fingernails, there is also DNA evidence that showed that Noor was fighting for her life every step of the way. She did not want this. People need to stop telling women what they did or did not want. The worst part of this version of events, that there's other version of events, okay? Zahir tries to convince authorities of like version 1, version 2, version 3. But the worst part of this version of events is that Zahir actually stood in front of Noor's father and stated this. He said he beheaded her because she begged him to be sacrificed. He said sacrifice is a ritual in Islam, and Noor wanted to sacrifice her life and presented herself to me for that purpose. Noor's father, can you imagine like the anger he must have felt? But he didn't let it out. He kept it in. He stood tall, he stood up for his daughter, and he was dignified. He gave 3 words: you are lying. This was Zahir's newest version of events. His previous ones included, the first one was pretty straightforward. He said that he proposed to her that night and she rejected him, so he killed her. This is immediately upon arrest. This was the first story that he had, which most people believe is the true story. Now, you're probably wondering why he would even confess to something like this if he had plans to get away with it. Let me tell you, he told the Pakistani courts and the police around him, you can't put me in jail. You can't even try me because I'm a US citizen. And everyone's like, you are dumb. You're dumb. Yeah.
So can they try him or no?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
A U.S. citizen is subject to whatever country that they're in and that country's laws. So if you go to vacation in Europe or Mexico or South Korea, you are subject to that country's laws and you can be tried for breaking the law in that country. But I don't know why he didn't think that, because
So he's a murderer and he is ignorant.
Yeah.
He's dumb.
And he was so confident about it. So he's like, yeah, I killed her because I proposed to her and she rejected me, so I killed her. And then later, for some reason, he changed his story because I think that he really wanted to just, try to kill her reputation even after her death. Because he stated, no, I found out that she was in like a very promiscuous relationship with someone else and I killed her because she deserved it.
Wow.
And at one point, he even argued he had no idea what happened. No, really. He changes his story. He goes, no, okay, so the truth is, now I'm telling the truth, right? Noor comes over with a bunch of demanding that he let her host a big drug party at his house because his parents weren't home. He said, I'm just a frail, dainty 30-year-old boy. I didn't know how to say no. I really didn't want to because I was leaving for America that night, but she already started inviting all of her friends over. They all started getting high, and they knocked him out. He said he finally woke up tied up, everybody was gone, and Noor was dead. He said he was rescued by the police officers, insinuating that he wasn't tied up by the therapy employees that day. He was tied up whenever. He doesn't even know when he was tied up. Probably like 2 days ago.
What?
Yeah. He stated the only reason he was even being accused of Noor's murder was because Noor's dad was a very influential person and he was working with the police to frame Zahir. He said, Noor's father wants to get money from us, and for that reason, he, along with the police, built a case against me and my family. He also claimed that he had to be framed for the murder, otherwise it would come out that Noor was having a massive party. He even accused Noor's phone of being swapped in police custody to hide the fact that she had invited her, quote, drug friends over, which is really, really rich coming from Zahir. Because a few years ago, 4 girls had left Zahir's home after a party. It was alleged that Zahir was supplying drugs at that party, and the 4 girls were incredibly high when they left. They got into a car accident, and all 4 died on impact. But now he's like, I was too scared to say no, and I hate drugs. That was just brushed under the rug at the time. Zahir also accused social media activists and women's rights activists of running a campaign against him for their own, quote, vested interests and, quote, money. Whatever that means, because, yeah, we make so much money protesting on the streets, missing work to protest. That makes sense. At one point, Zahir had straight up said to journalists, I was angry, I killed Noor with a knife. Another time he said, I did it. So not a very credible person, obviously. Zahir goes back and forth from outright confessing to the crimes, taking it back, concocting bizarre stories, and then outright confessing to the crimes again. He also did this thing that whenever he was speaking in Urdu, he spoke with this, quote, cute accent. So when you learn, it's like when you learn a different language. If you grew up there learning it, by the time that you're 30 years old, you have a very wide vocabulary. You probably pronounce things in the correct way. Mm-hmm. But let's say you're an adult and you learn it. You might have like a cute accent where you mess up words. You kind of sound like a foreigner, and it sounds almost a little more babyish.
Okay.
So my Korean definitely sounds more babyish, childish than my English, because English is my primary language. Whereas Korean, because I don't know specific words, I try to I'm like, okay, how can I describe this? Because I don't know that word. I need to use the words I already know. Yeah.
It's like how I was telling you, like if you only spoke in Korean to your mother, so then you can only talk in certain ways.
Yes.
Like to a kid that's talking to adults, I guess, maybe?
Yeah, so it's kind of like, it's more childish for sure. He's only speaking in this like childish accented Urdu, which typically garners a lot of sympathy from people because it's kind of cute, and also it shows that you probably lived abroad, but you're trying to learn your own language, right? It shows that you care. But it was all a facade. Sure, he was born in the US, but he grew up in Pakistan. He literally moved back, and he didn't leave to go back to the US and to the UK until his undergrad days, so college. So he should be not speaking like that.
So he's fluent, but he's pretending.
Yeah. Trying to be like, little old me, I'm so confused, and I'm such a big baby. And one of the biggest questions of this case was, how much did Zahir's parents actually know about what was going on? Neither of them were home. Some sources state that they were away from business or on vacation, but there are call logs to suggest that Zahir was in frequent communications with them during the brutal 48 hours. The day of the murder, Zahir spoke on the phone with his dad more than 5 times. That's a lot for a 30-year-old man to keep calling his dad 5 times in a day. One phone call lasted around 30 minutes, while the others ranged between 2 to 4 minutes. It is believed that Noor was alive and being tortured while he was making some of these phone calls. After Noor's suspected time of death, Zahir called his mom a few times. Collectively, he was on the phone with his mom for over an hour, 72 minutes.
Whoa.
Zahir also continued to call his dad multiple times after Noor's suspected time of death, allegedly. Zahir's dad, speculating, probably knew about the murder and tried to calm down his son over the phone. And it's been said by certain people that are close to this case that his dad practically told him, "You don't need to worry, I'm going to send people to rescue you and help dispose of the body." And it is believed that those people are the therapists.
So they're coming to clean up.
But maybe they saw all of Zahir's friends and they're like, oh shit. Like, people know we're here. Yeah.
And then Zahir attacked him.
Yeah. Zahir's parents were both arrested. While being arrested, Zahir's dad said, "It's a very tragic incident, and I would personally like to make condolences to Noor's father because I know him personally. It's a very heinous crime, and I would like justice to prevail." Zahir's mother said, "Noor was also a woman, and I'm a mother and woman too. I also deserve sympathy. I am hopeful." Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. "I am hopeful the judiciary will give us justice." 2 of the 3 house staff were also arrested for being accomplices to the murder. So I don't know if one, the chef, was just not there most of the time, or had left, or didn't actively try to prevent Noor from leaving and played more of a passive role. He didn't seem to be arrested, but the gardener and the guard that persistently kept not letting Noor escape, they were arrested. Dr. Tahir and his 6 employees were also arrested on charges of concealing evidence. It suggested that Dr. Tahir was heavily on Jaffer's payroll, and he was in Zahir's dad's pocket, so to speak. So people thought that they went over with the intention of cleaning a crime scene, because why do you bring so many people over? And even later in interviews that he doesn't even refer to Noor by her name. He just keeps calling her the girl, which I find incredibly annoying, but also very insightful into who this man really is. He states that he has no idea why Zahir's father called him to show up at the family home. He does feel like it's some sort of trap, but he doesn't know what. He just said that he showed up believing a former patient of his that had clearly struggled with mental health before was having some sort of relapse. He said the reason that they didn't call the police is not because they wanted to go in there and clean the evidence, was just because it was hectic. They waited out there for 30 minutes because typically patients will realize that there's no coming out of this and they'll walk outside themselves to meet with a therapist, and that usually is a better result in the long run. And then when they went in, they were attacked and it was just chaos, he said. He argued that there was no way that they would have known about the murders prior. He also states, "We didn't even tamper with any evidence." Which, not a great thing to say. It's kind of the bare minimum. He also whined in an interview, "We held him down, we tied him up and subdued him for the police, and nobody is giving us a pat on the back for this? You're all just trying to find the error in our actions? I'm so disappointed. You journalists are so shameful." But the biggest discrepancy was a leaked audio recording of Dr. Tahir revealed that Zahir had come down to talk to them briefly when they first gathered at the house.
What?
This was after Noor was already dead and before they took the ladder to go up to his room. When Zahir was arrested, he had blood on his shirt. So either he changed his clothes and then changed back, which why would he do that? Or the therapist saw that he had blood on his clothes and they didn't do anything.
Wait, I'm so confused. He came down and talked to these people about what?
No one knows, yeah.
So what audio came out? Which audio?
It's like a clip of Dr. Tahir talking about what happened.
Oh.
Yeah. But he doesn't tell the police these things.
We were called in 3 hours after the girl jumped and he murdered her. 3 hours after that. So the question of the timing, when were we there? Was the girl in the room? Could we have intervened? The very fact that the intervention is a mistake. Intervention requires family members to be present.
Also, even if Dr. Tahir didn't know that someone was murdered in the house, he at least knew that there was a woman in the house. Because the phone call that Zahir's dad made was, my son is soliciting a woman. And if you go there and you're like, oh man, I came there because I thought my patient was having a relapse, which is what he stated, and you know that your patient is in the house with a woman, you should know this is a dangerous situation. We don't know what's going on in that house. So we should act quickly. Someone could be in active danger. Side note, he would also argue that Zahir was never employed at the clinic, but there are literal photos of Zahir giving presentations to students on behalf of the clinic. Yeah. Oh, and at one point, Dr. Tahir asked the media why they cared so much about Noor's case. He said, when women are killed all the time and those cases just disappear from the news cycle, why are you guys so hung up on this one? What's really crazy though is some people took the doctor's side and even took it a step further. People tried to find ways to blame Noor for what happened to her, as if she had any control over this full-grown man's actions. These people wouldn't say outright, but the way that they talked about the case, you could just tell what they're thinking. For example, one big thing was when referring to the relationship between Noor and Zahir, many news outlets kept calling it an affair. Neither of them were married, so by Western standards, it's just a relationship. But in, like, I guess more conservative arenas, it could be considered an affair because they shouldn't have been dating in that extent prior to getting married. But still, it's just, I don't know, just adding that connotation to it is unnecessary. It's just unnecessary. What do you get out of it? And like, how does that excuse murder? And it's, you know what this reminds me of? It's how essay is written about. Next time you read an article about essay, take note of this. It's written about passively.
What do you mean?
It's always, almost always, especially when you're talking about public figures or people that are of importance, it's she was R-worded. It's never this person R-worded her. It's never this person taking that action. It's almost like this imaginary figure, this force of nature did the action on this woman.
Yeah, why is that?
Yeah, it's just
It
a
does
way.
sound less like serious and less focused on the
criminal.
The criminal, exactly.
Yes, it's more focused on the woman and what happened to her versus the criminal did this to her.
Right.
Yeah, it's, so this is kind of what it reminds me of. It's just small words that are like, why are you doing that? Like, obviously, it's a choice that these reporters are making to call it an affair rather than just a relationship. Even if they weren't in a relationship, doesn't matter. He killed her. Even if they were in a full-blown affair, let's say they were married, doesn't matter. He killed her. Does anything matter? He killed her. I'm so confused. Some netizens even blame the parents for not raising them with better values. They commented, I equally blame her parents. What the hell was she doing out in the middle of the night? What kind of parents are they? My mother won't allow me to go out after 7 p.m. and I'm 37. I still have curfew. Another comment reads, people should train the girls to not believe guys and not leave their homes blindly and join their boyfriends. Parents, please play your roles vigilantly. Or again, just train boyfriends not to kill, which I'm not sure one even needs training for that. It's a literal crime. Like, instead of women bending over backwards to stay alive, why don't people just follow the law? Because isn't that what laws are there for anyway? So if you're breaking the law, you're the problem. Like, the amount of mental cartwheels people are doing, it's just like depressing on this case. Like, I don't know what else to say. It's just straight up soul sucking and depressing. Others blamed Noor for not being, quote, a good Muslim, which I clearly don't have to point out how damaging that is. First of all, the researchers that worked on this case, they're all Muslim, and they're like, it is so painful to hear that. We have no idea what her relationship was like with Zahir. We also have no idea what her relationship was like to Allah. I mean, Noor, from what we know, was incredibly devoted to her faith. She had this strong relationship with Allah, and it might not have looked like everyone else's relationship, But correct me if I'm wrong, or correct me if I'm overstepping, because I'm not a religious person, but religion is about growing and learning about your faith and learning about yourself through your devotion. And of course, everyone's journey is not going to be identical. How can you shame someone for being in their own unique journey? I just think that we need to stop creating all these excuses for when women get murdered. Oh, not religious enough, too religious. Like, what? Even in death, women are devalued if they weren't perfect for society. Some netizens expressed confusion on why Noor even went to go see Zahir that night, as if that was the problem.
Wow.
Which again, something to note is that if he is dead set on murdering someone, I don't think that her saying no to that meeting that night would have wavered his determination in killing her. But another netizen commented, okay, this is all true, but why did Noor run towards her death? Why did she go visit the crazy man? It got so bad, Noor's father had to address the conversations about Noor. And he said, some people are accusing my daughter of very immodest actions. They should remember that they also have daughters. And for saying something like that, there is no compromise. As I have said multiple times, this is no longer about our daughter. This is about all our daughters. It's like these people refuse to look at the facts. She studied religion in college. She learned from many modern Muslim scholars. She was learning Arabic. Even when she was out with friends, she would slip away to do her prayers. She never skipped them 5 times a day. Noor was proud of her faith. She was constantly trying to be better. And obviously, she's from this super privileged family. But instead of acting like she's this little rich girl, which is condescending and patronizing, she embraced it and thought, okay, how can I use my privilege to help others? For every single birthday that Noor had, she asked all of her friends around her to come volunteer with her. They would go to orphanages, they would go to shelters, they would donate gifts. That's how she wanted to spend her birthdays. If there was ever a stray dog in need of assistance, Noor was ready to risk it all to help that dog. She was the definition of someone who wore fluffy socks and her hands were always being warmed on a mug of green tea. When she's gone, all of a sudden, none of that matters. All people want to talk about is, why did she go see her ex-boyfriend? Did she want this for herself? Maybe she shouldn't have dated before marriage. Even major news outlets had referred to Noor at times as, and I'm not going to say the Urdu phrases for it because I'm going to butcher them, but it translates into someone having unorthodox thoughts and opinions, which is a very seriously negative thing in a country like Pakistan, where people are generally a lot more conservative. Another phrase that they often used to describe Noor was selfish in terms of what she wanted to do with her life. They're basically calling her free-spirited, saying that she wants to do things the way she wants to do rather than what society and her parents want her to do, which sounds like a positive thing, right? But again, in a very conservative country, even in South Korea, which is a lot more conservative in the US, it's generally seen as a negative way to describe someone. It's kind of like a backhanded compliment. It's like, oh, you're so free-spirited, but it's also like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Just like fit in with society. One documentary also kept using the word ziba in reference to Noor being beheaded. Our researchers stated that it roughly translates into slicing the neck of an animal to kill it. It's more like saying Noor was slaughtered, like nonstop. One crime reporter speculated that this whole incident came to be because Noor didn't want Zahir to leave the country. Ooh. And that's why they got into a fight, because he wanted to leave and she didn't want him to. Yeah, it was... Yeah. And I don't know who the hell thought that this campaign against Noor was going to work, or like what they thought it was going to do, that all the other women listening would just agree with them and not be upset over this crime. Like, you're right. You're right. Like, we should just all behave better so we don't get murdered. Sorry for the inconvenience, everyone. We'll go back to the kitchen. Like, it didn't work. The plight of being a woman is universal. I mean, the feeling of being terrified to reject someone in case they get aggressive, the feeling of being scared to walk the streets at night when you're just coming home from school, being gaslit by the judicial system that you somehow caused your own victimization, that you caused the crime, that feeling that you need to baby someone's ego so that you can be safe is such a specific, visceral feeling that I'm sure if you felt it once, it's like a flame inside of you. And these women came together And there is a certain kind of power that comes out when women get together and stand for justice. Hashtag Justice for Noor was trending. Obviously, the crime itself was a shock that was lingering, but Noor was the daughter of a diplomat, and people kept asking, if this could happen to Noor, what happens to us? Nobody is safe. All she did was reject a marriage proposal.
We want justice for Noor. We want justice for women who do not have a voice. We want justice for people who do not have a voice. We want justice against violence. And it starts with structural reform.
There were conversations started about socioeconomic class and how it shapes perceptions about women's safety. Women gathered all around Pakistan to march and protest. In Ireland, where Noor grew up, people gathered in front of the Pakistani embassy.
Wow.
There were people holding signs that read, hang them, destroy them, humiliate them. We won't stay home so they can grow. No more justice for Noor. There was a candlelit vigil held for Noor in Toronto by human rights activists. I mean, Noor's story really touched a lot of people just from all over the world. I think women were and just still are over it, like just sick and tired of it. Many women came out and shared their own stories of abuse. Many women in Pakistan shared the same experience of dealing with violence against them and family members just telling them that the man that was beating them was just, quote, enraged, and to just be patient because he will come around. No, he can come to jail, okay? People are just over it. Activist Lena Ghani said, we're all tired of sending our prayers and thoughts every time a case happens. Noor's case is not an isolated incident. I don't want any more women to be an example. We are facing a gender terrorism epidemic. Why should the Noors of this country have to give up their lives for all of us to learn a lesson about gender-based violence? People shouted on the streets, women just want to exist without the fear of being or murdered. When the trial started, women were seen outside the courthouse holding signs that read, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for a life, death for the murderer, justice for Noor. Before the trial, Noor's father said, I have served this country, and now I want justice from the government. And if, God forbid, I do not get this justice, I will not leave them alone. I was her father. And then Zahir lost his mind. Or at least that's what he wanted the courts to believe. And he committed to the act, if you will. When Zahir was initially brought in the day of the murder, authorities noted that he was sound and in his senses. They said, he may have a history of taking drugs, but at least at this time, he was completely in his senses. He was completely aware of his actions. In the beginning, Zahir would show up to court looking, obviously he didn't look well rested, right? His prison is probably not the same as his mansion, but he looked a bit haggard. And that's to be expected for someone in jail. No one's going to feel sympathy for that. He looked a little tired. He looked a little like, okay, maybe his mattress isn't soft enough. But when he decided to switch to an insanity plea, he got increasingly more insane, conveniently. He starts acting out, screaming at the judge, screaming things like, this court is nothing but dirt. This court is dragging this because they have no power. I have never seen something more fake. This is all a puppet show. I have never seen so many more incompetent people in the same room in my entire life. He had to be escorted out of the courtroom. His hair was getting crazier and crazier by the day. He would just start yelling profanities at everyone. When he was escorted out of the courtroom, he would be rambling and pointing randomly as if he was having like a psychotic episode. To give him the benefit of the doubt, I'm not a doctor, obviously. The symptoms he is presenting could match with schizophrenia. However, the timing of this was just also convenient. The media ripped him apart, which I'm not really mad about. I think there's a lot of more things to be mad about right now about this case, but the media ripped him apart because his behavior to the media just gets progressively more, quote, psychotic as the trial progresses. So suddenly he just looked like he was having a rough time, and now he's being wheeled around in wheelchairs, coming in on stretchers, drooling like a zombie, being pushed and pulled by the police. There's a video of him being dragged out of court, and the officers are holding him by his arms and his legs as if he's like a duffel bag, and they're just like swinging him around as they're dragging him out of court. The theory was, once he realized that he wasn't going to come out of this alive, he started changing his behavior to appear more psychotic in hopes of getting the insanity plea. Ultimately, medical reports would declare him fit to stand trial. The report stated that the accused kept appearing in court in wheelchairs on the pretense of seeming, quote, mentally ill. Once he realized his insanity plea wasn't going to work, he went right back to just looking haggard and tired. No more court outbursts, no more wheelchairs, no more stretchers, no more mumbling. He did say, though, that he would rather die than go back to prison. He claimed that the guards were beating him. He even turned to Noor's father and said, "I don't want to die behind bars. I should be married and have kids. Noor and I fought. It was my fault, but she was also angry. My life is in your hands. Please, you can save me."
Dude, wow.
He made it sound like he was having the absolute worst time in prison, which honestly, I'm not sure what you're expecting, right? Like, if anything, it seemed like Zahir was getting special treatment for being a US citizen. So let me explain. Zahir was born in the US. He's a US citizen living in Pakistan. And like I said, he was like, "Oh, you can't arrest me because I'm a US citizen, right?" Well, the US embassy, a consular, comes to visit Zahir in prison and gently, nicely notifies him, "No, even though you're a US citizen, if you're in a foreign country, you are subject to the country's laws." But the US embassy did send him a cute little care package.
What do you mean?
Yeah, they sent him a package. Jail authorities returned the package to the US embassy, saying that they violated diplomatic protocols. The package contained books, clothes, and perfumes, like self-care items.
What?
It was a bad look. The US embassy came out to clarify that the gifts were sent to Zahir because, and I quote, "US embassies and consulates abroad are required by US and international law to provide assistance to American citizens who are incarcerated and detained abroad, regardless of the charges against them." So while the US embassy might have had their own reasonings behind it, it just did further anger the public. Like, Zahir is from a wealthy family. He just murdered and beheaded someone because they didn't want to marry him. I don't think he gets to read a novel right now. I don't think he gets to use a scented soap bar right now. It just felt like everyone from not only this country, but even in the US is like bending over backwards for a literal killer. It's like, what, are we playing games right now? Zahir and his parents were constantly seen in fresh new clothes and new haircuts while they're in custody. A police officer was even overheard telling Zahir, "Hey, you're a talented person."
What?
Yeah. It was just all so frustrating. Regardless, Zahir was found guilty of essay and murder. Originally, he received 25 years of hard labor in prison, but he appealed the decision, saying it was too harsh, and the judge came back and agreed that the decision was wrong. So they gave him the double death penalty instead. Yeah.
Wait, he got 25 and then he appealed?
And then they were like, "Okay, death penalty." Yeah.
Wow.
Which is interesting, but the double death penalty is to ensure that if he tries to appeal again, and even if one of the death penalties are overturned, he still has the other one. He received a death penalty for murder and one for essay. And nobody felt sympathy for him. No matter how hard he tried to get it, he would actually become a joke amongst mainstream media. News channels would play very intense, dramatic music while playing reruns of his outburst in court. It made it look like a soap opera. Yeah. Unfortunately, his parents and the clinic employees were acquitted, and staff members only received 10-year sentences in prison, which was a huge disappointment to not only Pakistani netizens, but also to Noor's parents. But the judgment against Zahir was still something. You know, many netizens have stated that Pakistan's track record for prosecuting gender-based crimes is very low. According to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Index, Pakistan ranks 153 out of 156 countries.
So this is considered a significant step for the country.
Huge. I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to tell you some of the previous court rulings that just happened, similar to Noor. So we don't have reliable data on crimes against women in Pakistan, but the UN estimates that the conviction rate in cases is anywhere between 1 to 2.5%.
Wow. So most 99% people get away.
Yeah. And victims don't even come out and try to press charges, because what happens when a victim is essayed or beat and they're a woman, suddenly they're on trial. You know, even just a few years prior in 2018, there was another high-profile case where a human rights activist was stabbed 23 times by her boyfriend on a busy public road. She had broken up with him and he stabbed her 23 times. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but that was later reduced to 2 years. And then the court was like, you know what? We're just going to acquit him. The Supreme Court had to step in and restore the 2-year sentence.
2 years.
Yeah. Just last year in 2022, a woman was killed by her own brother for posting, quote, shameful pictures on Facebook. The courts let him walk free.
How does that even make sense?
Yeah. In 2016, a council proposed a bill to allow men to, quote, lightly beat their wives should the need for punishment arise. The proposal bans forceful beatings, saying only a small stick is necessary to instill fear. So now this felt significant. This was the beginning to an end of women being murdered and killers getting away with it. Activists posted, Zahir's crimes were not only confined to rape and murder, but the fact that he used his money and influence to assail the credibility of the victim. This perhaps is another crime where the victim becomes the accused. The wounds Noor's assault and murder inflicted on the collective conscience of humanity may never heal. It is reassuring that beasts in human disguise will realize the consequences can be grave. So as of right now, I believe Zahir is appealing his death sentences, and we're just going to have to wait and see what the Supreme Courts will do. I assume there will be massive outrage if they try to overturn or do anything about that. And I think that we're seeing this everywhere. Women just are not putting up with shit anymore. And I think that it would be very wise for governments to take note of that, act, change, and protect women's right to live. You know, just exist and live without fear of getting murdered. And now, every October 23rd, women from all over the world, not even just Pakistan. So the first one was October 23rd, 2022, and hopefully this year it'll happen again. Women from all over the world have been preparing gifts for local orphanages and shelters in honor of Noor's birthday, because that's what she liked to do. Noor's family visit her grave every day. They all go to talk to Noor, and most days, Sarah will tell the rest of her family, go home, can you pick me up later? I just have a lot to say to Noor. And Sarah would just sit there talking to Noor for hours and hours on end. And that is the story of Noor. What are your thoughts? Please leave it in the comments. And obviously, I don't think that we need other disclaimers of like this, but like I said, Islam is not a violent religion. Zahir is not a true Muslim. He's a killer. This is no reflection of the religion. If anything, Noor is the reflection of Islam. So let me know your thoughts, and I will see you guys on Wednesday for the main episode. Bye.